Welcome to the Academy of Esports podcast. I'm your host, James O'Hagan. I'm here today with Dr. Stephanie Orme. She is a visiting assistant professor of communication and media studies at Emmanuel College in Boston, Massachusetts. She completed her doctorate in mass communication at the Penn State University, where she specialized in feminist video game studies, and her research examines the global digital gaming industries and gaming culture as they intersect with gender, race, sexuality, class, and disability. And she is interested in topics such as gamer identity, digital labor, and streaming and esports. So really nothing to talk about then today, is there?
No, not in the slightest.
Thank you so much for being a guest here today on the Academy of Esports podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you know, it is a very important topic, because as there's this democratization around esports, as esports is becoming more inclusive, hopefully, and in a lot of ways it's becoming inclusive, I feel like there are a lot of people, men like myself, in education, especially in Scholastic esports, who want to create these environments that is welcoming for everybody. Where we try to bring in as many people from across the spectrum of the school. My goal in my program is I want to make my program be a cross section of my school's demographics. The problem is that a lot of people, because again, there are a lot of men who are running these programs, don't necessarily have a lot of diversity in their program. So hopefully today, Dr. Orme, you can help us to discover how we can maybe do this in a better way. So first off, before we get into all of that, can you please give us a little background on how you found yourself from somebody who went from the Illinois State University in Normal, Illinois. And we were joking about that before we got started here, because we both lived in Illinois for a time. But how did you find yourself going to Penn State to study this? Because this isn't a topic that's very heavily studied right now, at least.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I've always been a communication major. I've always really been interested in the way that we think about how society is constructed, how we create that process as well, and also, you know, just how we interact with each other. It was later when I was getting my master's degree that I encountered someone who studied video games. And I said, whoa, I can actually combine, you know, my love of communication and media studies with my love of video games. I'd grown up a gamer, you know, my whole life, essentially. And so that was really exciting. Penn State ultimately ended up being a place where I found faculty who were willing to support that vision and give me the resources to go out there and pursue that idea. So I consider myself really lucky in that regard, because as you mentioned, James, it is, you know, video game studies as a whole is not something that is necessarily well received in all academic spaces. It's getting there, but it's, you know, it's still a newer kind of radical concept to some people.
Well, and Penn State is also one of those schools where the study of instructional technology, for example, is a huge part of their program. So I can see where it comes in. But again, just this whole idea, I mean, even a couple of years ago when I was talking to my dissertation chair about having esports be a part of my dissertation, he was very like, so how did you come across like helping people to realize that this is an important field of study, especially from the idea of being a feminist?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say, like, I consider myself grateful, because it wasn't too hard of a battle for me with my particular dissertation committee and the faculty there. We had a lot of really open-minded folks. In fact, one of my committee members is a media historian, very old school kind of guy. Patrick, if you ever hear this, this will make you laugh. But yeah, I mean, he's interested in studying, like, you know, the telegraph and all this really old school technology. You know, professes that he doesn't really know much about video games himself. He's totally a liar, because he, you know, caught me off guard a few times in defense, like, you're, you know, deceptive. But I love that, right? Because he understood that there was something really transformative about video games as a medium, right? And he saw the value, like other faculty did there, in, you know, there's a lot of new potential for storytelling, for effects on people, right? For matters of representation. So I found myself, you know, really fortunate again to be in that space where I didn't really have to do a whole lot of convincing. People just sort of understood, right? And I think some of that is a few students before me had come through and had done video game research, and are amazing, right? And have been really successful in that. So I definitely have to give some of them credit for maybe paving that road. Maybe they fought battles so that I didn't have to. But yeah, I think especially too with the idea of diversity and inclusion, that was something that drives all of my work. And again, it was something that I received a lot of support for. People really understood, video games are impacting people in these ways, and it's worth studying academically.
Well, and it is a field that, again, is still very new. It's fun and exciting because it is so new. The world is your oyster. You come up with the question, you could pretty much have the study and write in a lot of ways, the first paper on it. Because again, things are so new and becoming so interesting in this field. But, when I talk to people, it surprises some people when I talk about inclusivity and diversity, because I am a middle-aged white man. It's like, what is this middle-aged white man going to tell me? And then they tell them, like, well, the school district that I work in and I've worked in primarily high poverty districts, and my educational career has been in areas of students who are underserved in a lot of ways, variety of different ways. But again, it doesn't always answer the question of why is this person telling me this? Again, I talk about from the perspective of I use the Any Key report around diversity and inclusion. I talk about the Anti-Defamation League's reports on what's been happening in gaming and gaming culture with regards to harassment, and to the fairness of the Anti-Defamation League. They also talk about the positive things that are happening in gaming and gaming culture. But just a couple of weeks ago, there was a study that came out from North Carolina State called Gender and the Two-Tiered System of Collegiate Esports. And when I shared this article, because to me, it seems very matter of fact, it seems like, yes, we can see that there is this, while the pros have this culture, and we talk about collegiate and scholastic esports having a very different culture, you can start to see that there has been this male domination of the collegiate scene, maybe not so much in the high school one, but it really created some really hard pushback, especially from some collegiate coaches who read this. Why is this creating, I guess, in your opinion, some of this, I guess, pushback, if you will, this like, it's not like rage, but it's like, come on, we're trying. We really would love to make this for everybody, but why would they be so defensive against a report like something like this?
Yeah, I think that's great. Great starting point. I think you're right. You kind of already touched it on a little bit. The idea that people are a little defensive because they do generally feel like they've been trying, right? Most coaches and directors of programs that I've spoken to about diversity issues have said, hey, we're trying. It's not that we're actively doing things, consciously to try and exclude people. What are we doing wrong, right? And so I get asked a lot for, advice and tips on how to navigate this kind of terrain. So yeah, in my experience, it's not that organizations haven't been trying, or they really think they're trying, right? And maybe they're not trying in the right ways. So I think that is hard. It's hard to be told, that your efforts at something aren't enough, right? Especially if it's something that you feel in your heart you're actively trying to do, right? So right. I can see where some of that is definitely coming from on their part.
But is it, I mean, the attempts to try, and some of the things I've seen and heard from people in the past was, for example, hey, I male esports coach. There's a table of girls sitting at a table. I go up and I invite them, and they don't want to come. But they get to check off on their sheet like, hey, I attempted to today recruit some females for our program. That doesn't seem like the best way to necessarily go about it, creating the invitation to the esports experience. Am I right?
Sure. Yeah. I would find that incredibly off-putting, right? If someone just approached me while I'm like eating lunch, right? Don't bother me. I mean, I think a lot of it is, again, specifically in how it's being handled, right? That can just feel really intimidating to be approached in any kind of context, and especially, right, if you are a woman, to be approached by a man in that space, right, can definitely be kind of disconcerting. I'm a big believer in the philosophy of, you do outreach and you let those individuals kind of come to you, right? So if you build a culture in your organization and I'm sure we'll get into a discussion about, what that looks like, but hosting events or putting out recruitment flyers that make it clear that your organization is open to literally anybody who wants to join. The people who want to join will find you, right? And they will come to you if they feel that's a good space, right? And then as long as that space remains welcoming and affirming, they'll stay. But yeah, I don't think like the cold calling, walk up to somebody, who doesn't necessarily know anything about your organization and the culture of it. Yeah, it's probably not going to be successful the majority of the time, right?
Well, and that's what I've tried to impart to some people is, again, when you look at my program, 5 high schools, I know we've done a really good job. I believe compared to others, we've done a good job of recruiting, again, especially along minorities, sexual orientation, women, but we're not where I want us to be. We're still not that cross section of our program. But what is something, again, if it's just one, because a lot of times these programs are run by one person, they don't have a staff. I'm lucky enough that I've got 12 different general managers amongst our 5 teams. We do have women, we do have minorities represented in it. So kids can see themselves in the coaches and the general managers and the teachers who are trying to recruit them. But if I'm just that one person, white male, running that school program, what can I do to start, I guess, having that conversation, creating that invitation for people? Because again, starting from scratch is the hardest thing for people to do. And as you said, develop that culture of your program.
Yeah, totally. Well, yeah, I think one of the first things is, and this is obviously a luxury not everybody has, but it is about the students being able to see someone like them in those organizations, right? And this is one of the things about, being a woman, now nonetheless still a white woman, right? Cisgender woman, but still being a woman in those spaces, I think already gets rid of a huge intimidation factor that a lot of women potential players would see, right? Mm-hmm. There aren't many women running esports organizations in the collegiate scene, right? There might be more in high school, I'm not sure, but right, the collegiate scene, the people I know, right, it's still very male dominated. And so again, I think that, even in spite of best efforts, that's just it's a hurdle, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think, those leaders you do have to go out of your way, right, to be extra accommodating, extra welcoming and affirming of those individuals. One thing that I've been encouraging a lot of esports organizations to do is to even host events that aren't necessarily competitive in nature. And I know that seems like antithetical to what esports is supposed to be, but
not at all. Not to me, it doesn't.
Okay. Well, some people would really fight me on that and be like, that's not esports, right? But hear me out if you're those people. But having casual game nights, right, where, maybe it's even Smash, you're playing an esports title, but maybe the theme that night is, hey, maybe you've never tried this game before. You just want to come over, hang out, learn to play League of Legends or learn to play Dota 2 with some people who know the game, right? Mm-hmm. And you get people, and a lot of them women, right, who maybe have interest in playing that game, but are kind of scared off by the competitive aspect, right? So I think being asked to go into a club and an organization of people you don't know, or maybe again, you're in a minority identity population, and then also asked to be competitive and showcase your skills, that's really, off-putting and intimidating, right? So I think events like that can bring people in and kind of get them in a less threatening culture, to kind of get a sense for the other people who are in the group, right? And just make some friends and kind of socialize. And then once they find out that people in that group are actually pretty cool, right, and welcoming, maybe they have interest in joining a competitive team at that point, right? So I don't know, that's part of my whole radical thing too, with shaking up the definition of esports, right?
Let's talk about that. Let's get into that. How do you, because I'm all about the pro, as I tell people, if you want to build pro players, do a pro program. But for Scholastic, our goals aren't around developing pro players. So why would we want to create a pro experience?
Yeah. That's such a good point, right? Exactly. If our goal here is about education, right? Skills training, transferable skills for other jobs, right? Yeah, I don't necessarily care if they're the top in the region or whatever, right? Or hyper competitive. So I'm all about that, right? Really playing with the types of games that are played in esports clubs, right? And again, I think that's another thing that a lot of organizations overlook when they're asking about, again, diversity and inclusivity and why aren't more women coming to play for us, right? It may just be that the types of games that your organization runs just aren't that prominent among, women players, right? And so it might be worth widening that net of what your offerings are, right? Doing some surveys and polls of the community to see what people, are playing, right? And that's not to say that, women don't play first-person shooting games, that they don't play MOBAs, because they do, right? But we do know, based on pretty reliable evidence, that they're a minority population, right, within those groups because of harassment, right, intimidation, a lot of, social factors. But yeah, so I think that's another sort of way to try and get to some of those groups, right, by really opening up the scope, right, or the spectrum of what counts as a legitimate e-sport, so to speak.
I think that's a good point. It reminds, if people have not checked out the interview I did, oh gosh, it's probably been almost 2 years now, with Jay Collins and Hathaway Brown School, where Jay did start at an all-girls school, a very traditional esports program, and found out very quickly the girls were like, yeah, League of Legends, that's nice, but that's not for us, and actually they switched to Dota, which everybody would kind of go, well, that's kind of the same game, but for whatever reason, that was a game that spoke to the girls in that school. Or, they did things like drone racing, where they used, a drone racing simulator. I really am with you on that whole mindset of don't just focus on those AAA titles, because quite honestly, here's the other thing too, when we're talking about diversity, access to those titles is becoming much narrower. The community guidelines that Riot has done with regards to Scholastic and Blizzard has done with regards to Scholastic, even though we're using it in a teaching sense, even though we're not doing prize pools, even though they're still saying, sorry, you can't use our titles in these certain ways. And I really struggle with, again, even the culture around Riot and Blizzard with, the Me Too movement, Epic, Ubisoft, all these companies now, the dirt, is coming to the surface. I have a hard time as an educator squaring, yes, we're going to play this game, and at the same time, but support this company that has this really crappy culture that's very publicly exploding around us.
Yeah. I'm thinking it's Among Us, right? The game that just came out. I haven't played it yet. Probably like the only person on the planet who hasn't.
It hasn't just, here's the thing. It came out like a while ago. It's just now it's hitting. Yeah.
See, that's how much I know. But I mean, things like that, right? Or like, I'm even thinking like Splatoon, right? Has a competitive kind of aspect to it even. But yeah, I think again, like opening up, different kinds of potential competitive spaces, right? Or even less competitive spaces. Again, if the goal is about giving these students a sense of community, if, again, giving them transferable skills, like teaching them how to broadcast a game event, right? How to host a tournament. Like, to me, that's really what I want them to get out of these experiences, more so than, again, training to be pro, because realistically, that's what very few of them actually want to do, right?
And that's what we've done too with our, as you talked about the game nights, having those casual gaming experiences. Right now, because of COVID, we can't meet face to face. And we know that kids have divergent tech accessibility at home, whether some of them have consoles, some have PCs, some are mobile only. So we've decided to say, hey, let's just set up a whole series of different game nights, if you will, and allow them the opportunity to, just as you said, doesn't have to be hyper competitive, but again, create that invitation, create that experience that's like, hey, I like playing with these people. Let's take it to another level in all this. And even a few weeks ago when I was talking with Marcus Howard, when we were talking about independent developers, I think independent developers are the next big thing with esports. That's where the big titles are going to come from. That's where the big experiences are going to come from. And they may last for a year or two before they fade, but as you said, if your goals are around all these other things rather than creating pro players, so what, right? But is it as simple as, because I know a lot of people try to do this, I'm going to just create a girls' night, or I'm just going to create a girls' league, or I'm just going to create, because is that helping the situation? Is that harming the situation? Don't have a clear answer on that. So where do we fall on X only, whether it's girls or gender or sexuality? Where do we fall in that? What is Does it help or does it hurt?
It's a tricky question, right? Because it's really complex, because gender is complex, right? It's a lot more complex than people make it out to be. There's a lot of nuance there. I think having spaces that are, women only spaces can be really helpful in some contexts, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, and we've seen like women only teams, in the 90s, right? There was a big wave of those, early 2000s, women fielding competitive teams. There are like all women tournaments. And I think those are great. They erase some of the issues that come with, co-ed play, right? Toxicity and harassment and things like that might happen. But also if you look at things like the prize money associated with those tournaments, or you look at, in the cases of pro players, like their salaries, there's a huge difference between those women's teams, right? And those women's leagues and tournaments and those of the traditional male-dominated ones, right? And so first of all, I think there's something there that has to be reconciled, right? If we have those distinct, spaces, right, that are meant to be safe spaces for those different groups, right? They should be treated on some kind of same level, right? And we're not currently seeing that, which is problematic. Other issues that I see with sort of women's only teams or women's only spaces, first of all, is needing to be really inclusive in how we define women, right? So, for me, that would include trans women. Where do non-binary individuals, right, who don't identify as male or female or man or woman, right? Where do they fit in those spaces? So I think that's something that has to be acknowledged and, again, not just acknowledged, but affirmed, right? And treated as really valid, right, in those spaces, because that can be a really contentious point for individuals too, right? So, there's potential issues we run into there. And then the final big one for me too is I think back to the girls' games movement in the 90s, right? When developers said, hey, women and girls aren't playing video games. Which, first of all, not entirely true, right? But they said, there's this untapped market there, right? So what should we do? Let's design Barbie games, right? And all these games that are based around shopping and makeup and quote unquote things that girls like, right? Mm-hmm. And that quote unquote things that girls like is complex, right? Because not all girls and not all women like the same kind of stuff, right? And so if you sit down and say, we're gonna have a league for women, right? And here are the games that women play, odds are that's not a very comprehensive or very nuanced list, right? Mm-hmm. So that anytime we try to reduce anything to those kinds of like gender-based categories, you're always going to run the risk of like alienating people, right? So again, I say it's complicated because I think there are benefits to those spaces, but I think there's as many things we also have to be wary of, right? Again, like who do we exclude in our attempts to be inclusive, right?
And see, that's the hard part I think that a lot of people are struggling with is how do you, if somebody says, boy, I really want to be part of this, sorry, you can't be, or yes, welcome in, but understand here is this, it's, because you don't want to invite that one person in and then everybody go like, well, they're not, like me or us, they're very, and it's like it's this very difficult thing. I know that it doesn't seem like there's a very good answer to a very clear cut, but I like how you say, define it. When you define it not so narrowly, but it sounds like define it broadly and try to include as many people into that tent as you possibly can. Right?
Exactly. My preferred world isn't a place where we would need separate spaces for those people because all spaces are inclusive and welcoming of everybody, right? And that's the dream, right? Is that we take the spaces we have and we make it so that women and non-binary folks, and trans folks all feel accepted there.
It is hard. It is hard though to develop that trust, especially I know with a lot of our scholar gamers, we do have a number of female and non-identifying people who play. And the stories that they tell on why, they stopped playing is heartbreaking. And how much trust and we had one awesome young woman who became one of our JV captains for our Overwatch team. And it took her 2 years. Like we had this esports program going, but it took her 2 years to finally build up watching and seeing how things were playing out before she trusted enough to join.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and again, we don't want to create those situations where she becomes then a target because, and I think a lot of it had to do with the fact, and we talked about this earlier, you said, let's talk about culture. Our culture from the beginning has not been what computers are we buying and what games are we going to play. The culture has been, here's our 5 things. One of them is redefine athletic culture. And number 2 is diversify opportunities for student participation. And building from that, we know that our teams have to be able to support those things. So we're not going to worry about the games. We're not going to worry about the computers first. We're worrying about what we want our teams to look like out the gate. For me, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, usually when you start your team and the culture is set, it is very hard to break that culture once it is set.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. And that's why, I like that you were saying, from the beginning, right? From the onset, from its inception, it was built with those principles in mind. And that's it's key, right? Because that's the foundation of the whole organization. And you get people who are used to things, the culture being a certain way, and then you come in and say you're going to change that. That's when you often meet resistance, right?
Mm-hmm. And is it, again, going back to the AnyKey report, if you have not looked at the diversity and inclusion report from AnyKey, I will make sure to link that in the show notes, as well as the gender and 2-tier system study that it also came out. But is it enough to just look at the AnyKey report and go, okay, I've done everything that's on the AnyKey report? Or is there something that is maybe you would say is a good first step other than what is in that report?
Yeah, no, I think those are really awesome guidelines. The folks at AnyKey are rad. Like, they're totally on top of it, right?
Oh, yeah.
Amazing, like indispensable resource. Always one of the first places I refer people to when they have questions about diversity in esports. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I would say like there's probably always more we can be doing, right? And always further steps we can take. I know like AnyKey advocates a lot for having a code of conduct in place, right? And that's something I always come back to and always recommend. Again, it's about building that culture, from the get-go, right? And so having a code that doesn't just say that like people are welcome in your organization based on different identity categories, but also explicitly states what your organization does to support those individuals, mm-hmm. and what your organization does in response to people who are not supportive, right? Of not welcoming towards everybody in the group. And ultimately, like standing by and enforcing that kind of code, right, becomes really key. It's not enough to just like have it up there, right? Like, oh, it's in our bylaws somewhere, and then when something happens, never act on it, right? I worked with an esports org in the past where is before I had gotten there, but some women competitors on the team were having some issues with some men on the team, or one male in particular, and they kicked him out. They kicked him out of the organization. They said that kind of behavior is not tolerated in this group, right? Like, you're out, no questions asked. This has been going on for too long, kind of thing. And so that's exactly a model for, what I think we have to be pushing these organizations to do.
Yeah, I know with our program, again, code of conduct being a key thing, and wasn't something that we always had from the beginning, but was something that once, again, the AnyKey report came to light in 2019. It was like something that we went, oh my gosh. And thankfully also groups like NASEF, which work with Scholastic groups, have a code of conduct that you can go right now, download free, and take it, edit it, change it up, make it yours, whatever it is. But man, it is so, I can't imagine anybody working without one in this day and age.
Right. But you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. Like, places, I think now people are kind of catching on and doing it more. But it's always something I look for, right? And again, like, a lot of times, are you going to stick by it, right? Or, mm-hmm. or something in there's really vague. So any organization I'm part of, that's something that I'm always pushing for, right? Is be specific and tell me what actions are taken to ensure we actually follow through on this stuff, right? Yeah.
And that's key too. Again, I know we had a code of conduct set up for one of our high schools that was a little more punitive than I would have liked. And because as much as we want, there to be standards, right? Mm-hmm. K-12, you're talking about kids, you're talking especially about high schoolers where we're trying to change the culture. Kid screws up, does something completely heinous, calls somebody out, does something terrible, whatever. I want to feel like too, especially with K-12, if we're trying to change what the esports culture is like for adults, we have to do the work at the K-12 level, and we can't make it be so punitive that one strike and you're out. It's got to be something that there's a conversation, just like we teach kids with any subject. How to exist in this space also needs to be taught and modeled by the adults and the others in the group as well, who can put pressure on and say like, hey, that's not the cool way to act, right?
That's such a perfect point, right? My experience, has mostly been in the collegiate scene, right? Which, they're adults at that point. I am going to hold you a bit more accountable, right? And even then, depending on the infraction, it's not, you're immediately out, right? It should be a learning, it should be a teachable moment. But I think you're right, especially with K-8 or K-12, right? I mean, they're learning, right? They're still learning how to be humans in a lot of ways. And so I agree, this can be one of those really critical grounds to do that kind of educational work. And then when they are on collegiate teams, hopefully they're better humans, right?
I can tell you that, again, it's a brand new school year. We've already started recruiting. We have a lot of new freshmen in our Discord server, and we do have our memes channel. And for some of the freshmen, it's been a learning curve, we shall say, for the last couple of days. And again, not kicking them out, not saying like, hey, sorry, you put something inappropriate up, you're banned, you're booted. Yeah. It's either a DM from me or from one of the other general managers, because we have, again, 13 adults serving in this Discord server. So we pretty much have a lot of coverage, and we may miss something now and then late at night because they're up at 4 a.m. posting God knows what. But it's hey, you have to understand you're part of a bigger community here. This is not your Discord. If you want to go do that in your Discord, that's on you. But here, this is not the acceptable behavior. Please think before you post next time. It's amazing how it usually only takes one conversation. Yeah. After that, it's usually, they can code switch. Just like, the Stanford writing study said that kids know how to code switch when it comes to writing a text versus a paper. It's like, as soon as you go, no, we're doing things to a different standard. We're doing things differently here. This is not you and your buddies hanging out. It becomes like, oh, now I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. So. I mean, that's an awesome example too, right? And I mean, memes are kind of weird because memes are in that space of like, well, it's playful and it's a joke, right? And I think, freshmen at that age are often still figuring out the politics of, how it's a joke can still have real world harms, right? And so I think at that level, there's still some of that education that has to happen. I actually think that Discord that's an amazing tool to be able to have those conversations. And like you said, in my experience, it often is a conversation that then puts them on the path. Like, oh, I didn't really realize the implications of what I was doing, right? I was just messing around with my friends. And so I think that's awesome. I'm glad that, Discord has been serving that kind of role for that organization.
So it's kind of shift things around again. Let's put it back to, hey, I am white male educator. My team is all boys. Oh my gosh, I have a problem. And I realize what it is. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to start to tackle this. We're going to make our team be a cross section of our school. And I am trying to figure out what to do. What is is there a classic mistake that may be made that kind of tries to fix the problem? Is there anything that people are doing that maybe you just go, ooh, maybe that's for something later, but isn't necessarily the first step outside of, say, the code of conduct? Is there a classic first mistake that people try to make to try to fix this, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a lot of times I think it's going to sound weird, but it's almost like people try too hard, right? So again, they come in with stereotypical ideas about, again, quote unquote, what women gamers want, right? And try to go after them with these preconceived ideas about, again, the types of games that women might want to play, or I don't know, like other things that would appeal to them, instead of just treating it kind of like anything else, right? Of saying like, hey, we're this organization. If you like playing games, come check us out, right? And again, like have diverse offerings. That's great, but I don't think you necessarily go and target your potential women audiences with specific games in mind, right? It's like, hey, women, we have Sims over here. We know women love the Sims, right? In. Like something like that, right? It would feel, competitive Animal Crossing. I don't know. I'd be down. I'd be signed up for that instantly, personally. But yeah, I don't know. It's. I think sometimes people kind of overthink it a little bit, right? Like there are women who do play a lot of these games, and again, I think if you're if you just sort of chill, right, and put yourself out there, let it be known that you exist, right? Participate in student organization. What do they call them? Like those like open house type of things, right?
Oh, yeah, open house.
Yeah, like that type of stuff, right? Or even doing an open house for people who are just kind of interested and come in and like meet people on the team and ask questions, right? Like, I think that's all you do, right? And then again, it's about making sure when people show up, that you're respectful of them, that you make them feel welcome, and the rest kind of does itself. Like again, if women are interested, right? If anyone is interested in playing a game and they want to be part of this, like they'll try to be part of it as long as they feel welcome there. So I think sometimes we like focus so much on recruitment and trying to like ensnare these people. Again, it almost has that effect of scaring them off, right? I'm thinking of your example of the guy like walking up to the table and be like, "Hey, ladies, join the team," right? Like, don't do that.
Well, and I absolutely get that, and I, again, it's so easy, I guess. Is you're right. Some people won't relax about it. I know. Again, I look at it just across the state level, and I have people who I work with who look at things and go, we really need to make a change on this. And I agree with them, but it's like, dang, I don't even know where to start at the state level with all of this, because it is it can seem like, as you said, talking about this too much can also be off-putting to some people. It can push them into corners, as we saw again with that Collegiate Esports report. And again, I didn't look at the Collegiate Esports report as being a negative towards anybody, but some people I really took it personally, that they looked at that report and said, well, I run a varsity program. I am one person running a program on a shoestring budget. I have very little resources. I have very little time to do everything else, as well as do the proper recruiting. So, it's almost like we almost need to be, because I know some people are trying the best they can, but we also need to have a sense of forgiveness, I guess, for a lot of people. It seems it's so easy to call people out, but there needs to be a level of forgiveness as well too, I would assume.
Yeah,
to a point.
Exactly, to a point, right. Yeah, there's a point where if you're obviously doing nothing, right, making no attempts or actively driving people away, clearly there's an issue there, right? Yeah, so I'd agree with that.
I do have to say, though, because you were getting back on games and you were saying like, oh, The Sims, and I laughed because I was a huge fan of The Sims. Probably if I picked up The Sims, I would probably sit, if I have it on my computer, and if I launched it right now, 12 hours later, and all the packs are now installed and everything else. But I was so fascinated to find out this other piece of information just from my own community, which last year we had the GEMS conference, girls, engineering, math, science. Okay. And we did an esports event, not an event, but like a informational, right? And it was me and one of our female general managers. She was the one who came in and we met together, because me going in there doing it would be like ridiculous. But what we found was when we started polling the girls in the room about what games are you playing? And I thought it was going to be, there was a lot of Minecraft and there was a lot of Roblox. Number one game of these 7th and 8th grade girls, though, was Call of Duty.
Love it.
And number 2 was NBA 2K. And when I dug in, I said, well, why do you pick, where did you pick those games from? Why did you pick those? And here's the thing, too, that we have to realize is that these games aren't picked in silos. They're not picked alone. They're saying, well, my brothers are playing it.
Yeah.
And I want to kick my brother's butt. I mean, it's like, I can play this game better than my brother. And it's just like my mother, when she was a kid, my mother had 3 brothers, and she was the only lefty. So they brought her to play baseball, and she played first base. but she wanted to because she wanted to be with her brothers. It's kind of the same. There's seeing a lot of that as well too. It totally broke down stereotypes for me. I was like going, well, we can't do Call of Duty in Scholastic, but NBA 2K, guess what now? Now we're looking more at NBA 2K as being a game that we're bringing in and formalizing in our competitive scene.
Right. I love that. Right. And a lot of my research has found similar things. Right. In my dissertation, a big part of it was looking at how women who play games now got into it. And a huge section of that was growing up with a male figure in the household, either dad in some cases or an older brother who got them hooked on games. And they end up playing and loving a lot of the same games, right? Like playing Doom and things like that and being really into first person shooters today. So that's a huge part of it, right? You're exactly right. Like these games aren't selected arbitrarily, right? In isolation from other things. And so again, it doesn't make sense to go in with this like gender stereotyped preconception of what all women like to play, right? Yeah, so I mean, I love that story. I think that's great, right?
Well, if there are, because I know there's a lot of people who listen to this program, both collegiate and in the K-12 realm and others, but how, if other than the NEQ report or the Anti-Defamation League report, which doesn't really talk to what we're talking about here, it more kind of gives you the tone of what people are maybe facing, where else can we go to get information to help guide us through this? Because I really feel like this is something where if you screw it up, it's hard to come back from, especially when you ruin the invitation to the experience for a group of people. Where else can we go to get good information about this?
That's a really good question. I can't say
other than you, obviously.
But I was gonna say, I can't think too much of like particular organizations, but I think there are a lot of individuals who are trying to do good work in this space. I'm thinking of, there's a newish organization, Queer Women in Esports, is doing.
I had Dr. Lindsay on last week.
Yeah, perfect.
And that's where I found you, was through Dr. Lindsay.
Oh, okay. Yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think things like that are really great, right? And obviously like speaking to a need here. Now I'm trying to think of like all the people I follow who are kind of doing work in this area. I mean, I would say a lot of it is like trying to find examples of successful organizations. And I wish we had more of them, is the thing, right? But looking to those and then celebrating those as like models or examples for what we can do, right? There have been some like, female-led teams, but unfortunately a lot of them tend to be kind of short-lived, right? So I feel like, that's the trick.
And professional. That's the other part of it too. And they have different, again, they have a different mindset of competition versus the Scholastic. So yeah, I agree. It is hard to find those examples.
I feel like I don't have a great answer to that, unfortunately, right? Because I feel like a lot of the people right now are doing that work in the present, right? It's very much an ongoing project.
That's a great way to say it, because it is. Again, going back to your dissertation research, which, feminist gaming studies is not something that falls off the tip of the tongue of most people when they're talking about what do you want to major in or what do you want to study. You're again at the precipice. There's a lot of people at the precipice of the beginning. People think like esports is this old thing. It's like, no, the beauty of it, we're in that. I don't like using the term Wild West. I will say we are more in like this dark ages, and we're almost to the Renaissance. Like the Renaissance is right there. And there's, the Renaissance didn't just one day go from the dark ages to the Renaissance. It was like the Renaissance started in places. Right.
Oh, exactly. And I love that metaphor. It's so good.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it starts in Italy, right? It starts in Florence. With this, I think Scholastic esports, if we do it right, can be the Renaissance of this, and the other part of this too, we have to call out when we see stuff like an all white panel. Or, it's like, oh, you're going to talk to us about Scholastic esports, but you're going to present us with an all white panel. Well, that's not my student. So where's the value in that? Or again, seeing that the whole organization is completely male dominated, and you as a colleague should be like, hey, do we need help? Do we need to set up a series of diversity and inclusion committees, advisory committees, specifically because I think this is such a such an important topic, and it needs to be done. But again, I really feel like the Scholastic is where the renaissance of esports can begin, because it's not happening up at the developer level, is it?
No, it is not.
So, but is there hope? Is there positives? Is there something you can share that you're like, a couple of years ago, I would have never thought this, but now I really see something good coming?
Yeah, I think so. I obviously, as someone who's grown up playing games, who still plays them, who made a career out of researching them, games as a whole, I think, have more good to offer us than the negative things that people want to talk about, right? And I think with regards to esports, because I've kind of, again, having like you, the vantage point of seeing kind of before all of this and then seeing it really explode over the last few years. I think even though it's got a lot of growing pains and we're still sussing some of that out, we've also seen some really amazing stuff. I mean, I can't say I foresaw a future where kids could get college paid for to, be on a competitive video game team, right?
Mm-hmm. I never would have thought it in a million years.
It's amazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or to see high school curriculum designed to some, with that kind of stuff in mind, right? I think is amazing. And because again, I don't think it's just like, oh, it's cool that people are getting paid to play video games, but again, it's about all these other skills that come with it. It's about this understanding of the complex network of things that make up esports, right? All the technology, the networking of computers, the broadcast aspect of it. And, again, I think it's just what's been really cool. One of the things that I think is one of the biggest takeaways is just the career paths that it's opened up for students. I have students who have done production work for esports organizations, like put together little podcasts, who are now working for big publishers and big developers and being content managers for these companies. So, I mean, it's opening up like a whole new array of opportunities for them that, again, I never would have thought, an esports observer, right? People like controlling the camera over the game fields, right? Like that's a role that didn't exist before esports was a thing.
But let's talk about the roles real quick, because I just want to make sure that we talk about this, because I think this is really an important point to what you're talking about. Is it enough for collegiate team, scholastic team, pro team to have females in support roles versus being on stage as the talent, the gaming talent, if you will? Sure. Is it enough? Again, perfect example. The group that I love, University of California, Irvine, has a all male team, but has females in support, in a lot of support roles. Is that though enough? Right.
It's a start, right? You can think about like, just like traditional sports, right? It's the same thing, women on the sidelines, right? But not out on the fields. I know, obviously my vision, right? I think the ideal thing we're going for, it would be to have those women also fielding those actual competitive teams, right? I mean, even when you think about the types of roles that the women are involved in production, they also tend to not be the casters as often, right? They're often, again, like the equivalent of a sideline reporter, right? They're, a figurehead at a desk, and then they toss it over to the men who tend to do most of the analytical work, right? Which is interesting too. So I think we still have a long way to go with regards to that in terms of careers, right? So yeah, I think I advocate for women in esports and professional capacities in both production type of roles, but I would also love to see more women pro players. Absolutely.
Okay. One last question. And I did give you the opportunity to think of this one before. It is a good question. And I got to give credit where credit is due. Travis Witt, who's one of my general managers, he interviewed people for his captain roles today for his teams. And he used this question. So if you could be a character from any game, what would that character be?
It's such a tough question.
Isn't it though? It's ridiculous.
It's the hardest thing we've talked about all day today.
I know. Talk to me about, hey, you want to set up your esports program? Let's go for 4 hours. This question, I was stumped for a good 20 minutes.
Man, it is so hard. I would say, so I don't know if you've played the game Horizon Zero Dawn.
I've got it. I have not. I have not.
Oh my gosh. As soon as this is over.
It's one of the ones I bought for my PlayStation 4. I bought the PlayStation 4 and I bought that game when I bought the PlayStation 4. Yeah. I actually have the disc.
It's so good. So it's one of my all-time favorite games ever, first of all, to give you that.
Okay.
I mean, it's amazing. It's visually breathtaking. The music is fantastic. One of the best soundtracks in gaming ever, I think. And the gameplay and the story are just awesome.
You're talking to a Final Fantasy VII person, so be careful.
Hey, I'm a Final Fantasy VII. I think this is a better game. But anyway.
Really? Oh, that's a very bold statement.
That's a whole other podcast episode.
Oh my goodness. I love that idea. That's a good idea.
Yeah, but the main protagonist in Horizon Zero Dawn, Aloy, is just like awesome. She's a super confident, competent, athletic woman. She is like runs around with a bow and arrow, like shooting these dinosaur robots. She's got some sass edge to her. She's smart. Like she's rad. I think she's super cool and just like a really relatable, down to earth kind of character, in spite being like really awesome.
You had me with she shoots bows and arrows and kills dinosaur robots.
So I'm telling you, you got to play this game.
I have it. It's just one of those, COVID didn't keep us in lockdown long enough for me to get to it, unfortunately.
That's fair.
Yeah. But I did finish Final Fantasy VII remake in the short version of it.
Oh, yeah.
Because we've still got, they're going to redo the whole thing, but they only did like the first part. So
Right.
Well, that is an excellent answer. And you've given me a good reason to go finish or get that game thrown into the PlayStation 4, get it going this weekend, because that's when I can do most of my gaming to check things out. Dr. Steph Orme, thank you so much for being on the Academy of Esports podcast today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was really fun.
That will do it for this week on the Academy of Esports. I've been your host, James O'Hagan. Esports are organized competitive video games allowing schools to redefine their athletic culture, diversify opportunities for student participation, promote good physical and mental health, increase collegiate scholarship pathways, and play games. We can never forget the importance of play. The mission of the Academy of Esports is to support these ideals. The vision of the Academy of Esports is for all students to experience the fun and joy of playing competitive video games. You may follow me on Twitter at Jim O'Hagan. That's at JIMOHAGAN, and through the Academy of Esports account at TAO Esports. It's a great way to get the latest blog posts, podcast episodes, and news coming out of esports and education. And remember, you can continue your engagement by going to www.taoesports.com. You can also connect through Facebook at www.facebook.com/TAOesports. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to our time again next week.